You're listening to episode number 15 of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast. I am so excited about this week's episode. When I was planning out what I wanted to do for this month and I knew I wanted to do a series about senioritis, I thought, who do I know that has had a ton of experience teaching seniors and upperclassmen in their teaching career? And I immediately thought of my friend Diana Price. Diana is a full-time high school science teacher that has been in the classroom the last decade. She received her undergraduate degree from Clemson University in secondary science education. We were in the same program together and graduated the same year. And she received her master's from Clemson in biological sciences. Go Tigers! She currently lives in Beaufort, South Carolina with her loving husband, her daughter who was born just under a year ago, and their yellow lab. This episode is so much more than I ever anticipated when I first asked her to be on the show. She shares some tips for how she personally handles senioritis with her students, but also so much more. She talks about her entire teaching experience thus far, all from starting out as a floater, teaching at the high school that she attended, to now teaching mid-pandemic at a really small private school on her own island, so to speak, because she's the only teacher who teaches the 5 preps that she has. She shares a wealth of knowledge in particular from her experiences teaching AP biology. So I really cannot wait for you to hear from her, especially for those of you first-time AP bio teachers out there who are getting a little anxious as the date of the AP bio exam is approaching. But no matter if you teach AP biology or not, I am confident you will glean something useful from my conversation with her. So without further ado, let's get to my interview with Diana Price. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I'm passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You're in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. Hey, Diana, how are you?
I am so great. How are you, Rebecca?
I'm awesome, and I'm so excited to interview you because you are a person I know in real life because we did the same teacher training program together. But I know you, but I know the people who listen may not know you. So why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself and your teaching experience and your background in education?
Okay, perfect. So I am Diana Price, and we did the same program at Clemson over 10 years ago, high school science teacher. So this is actually my 10th year in the classroom. And in those 10 years, I have, just like you, been at a really big public school where I've had lots of teachers to collaborate with. I have been at one charter school. And right now I'm currently at a really tiny private school where I stand alone, kind of on an island by myself, because I am the only teacher that teaches every class that I teach.
I know. I've been on that island too. And what's so funny is I think it's really funny that we went to college and then we both ended up across the state. And now we live like 40 minutes from each other even.
Yep. Now we're across the river.
Now we're across the river. Exactly. If we could fly to each other's houses, we could be there a lot sooner, which is funny. Okay. So tell me then, you've had a lot of diverse experience. What led you first to deciding you wanted to be a secondary science teacher in the first place?
So I just love science. Love science in high school, love science in college, but like a lot of people, didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. When I was at Clemson, I definitely thought I would end up in the healthcare field. And just after several years, I wasn't convinced that that's where I thought I should be. And looking back, it's so funny. I always loved to tell my mom what I learned that day in science. And my mom is not a science person. And bless her little heart, she would have like glazed over eyes as I like explained, I don't know, all the organelles of the cell. And she would like nod along and go, wow, that's great, honey. So looking back, I always had a teacher side to me that I didn't realize. So, she kind of brought that to my attention one day. And I had several aunts and uncles that were teachers. And after just lots of kind of thinking, what am I going to do with science? It made sense that I became a teacher. And I definitely feel like I'm in the right field.
Oh my gosh, totally. Did you start as a secondary science ed major at Clemson, or did you add it like I did?
I added it. I started as a genetics major with full intentions of doing something healthcare.
Okay, that's so interesting. We have like so much in common. It's ridiculous. Okay, so tell me then, you've taught a lot of different things I know over the last 10 years. What's been your favorite course you've taught and why? And maybe your least favorite course you've taught and why?
So my favorite, don't even have to think about it, is anatomy and physiology. I've always loved it, but I really think there's two reasons I love it the most. You know, when you're in school learning to be a teacher, the thing they always say is make it relatable to your kids. However you can make it relatable, do that. And there is not a chance that you cannot make anatomy relatable. You know, every kid that walks into your room has a body of their own. I think it's super interesting, even for the kids that don't tend to love science. And I love watching their eyes light up and enjoy it more than they think they would. You know, they think they're walking into just another science class, and kids always love it. So I love that. Secondly, my very first year teaching, I did not have a classroom. I was a floater. And I remember being so disappointed, like I didn't have the cool classroom to decorate. But what ended up happening is my mentor teacher that year taught all anatomy and physiology. And she was actually my teacher in high school because I ended up teaching at the high school that I went to. So what happened was on my planning periods, I would sit in the back of her lab and grade papers. And I literally listened to her teach this course all year long. And looking back, you know, I was so disappointed I didn't have a classroom, but it was the best experience I could have asked for because I just watched her teach all the time. And I learned how she, you know, did funny voices like the tough tibia and the fine fibula. And I just got to watch her teach. So I think I always had a really good foundation for anatomy because I was practically a student in the class my first year.
That's awesome. And I feel like that's truly the best way to learn is by watching someone else. That's actually such a gift. Any tips for floating for all the other floaters out there listening? How you made it work? What were you teaching when you were floating?
So I had 3 different classes. I had anatomy and physiology, marine science, and biology. So prepping different labs in different teachers' classes. And honestly, the best advice I could give would just to be so nice to those teachers that are graciously letting you use their room. Not that I ever had a bad experience with any of them, but I tried my best to prep for labs the day before and get everything in the different classrooms that I needed so that, you know, there were certain materials like dissection trays that I would have to cart back and forth because we didn't have, you know, tons of sets, but anything I could do to just streamline and make that class change easier. We've kind of joked about this before. I'm a type 9 or number 9 Enneagram. I'm not the most forward thinker, but being prepared really helped.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. I feel like having those relationships, like you said, you're not going to have a bad relationship necessarily per se, but going above and beyond to be extremely kind and generous, goes a long way because then they'll do so much more to help you.
I was about to say, a lot of times they would help me. Hey, when my class is over, I'll go ahead and pull this out. And, you know, just being super grateful and helping them out in return when I could.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So if you had to say what your least favorite course you've taught has been, what would it be and why?
It would be marine science. And I feel bad saying that. And it had nothing to do with the subject. I was a first year teacher. I had no clue what I was doing. I did not have a marine science class in college. So now if I were to teach it, I think I would have so many more tools in my toolbox to do a good job. But I only taught it that one time. So I never really got the chance to make it better. So I just have you know, thinking back, I still have nightmares about teaching that marine science class to 18-year-olds when I was 22 and clueless.
We have all been there. I think that's one of the weirdest things when you're a high school science teacher and then you teach fresh out of college. It's if you have seniors, you're not that far apart in age. And so it's
no.
And marine's an elective, I'm sure. So they may not be quite the most motivated students you ever taught. So I'm sure that was a challenge. Okay. So I know you love anatomy and you've gotten to teach it a lot since then, but are any bucket list courses you want to teach? What would be your dream in the teaching sphere?
I would love, since I'm at a really small private school, we do not have a curriculum support person. We don't have anyone that really supports and helps new teachers. And since we're at a private school, a lot of teachers come to us without a teaching background, maybe as a second career, teaching high school math or something like that. And my perfect little dream job would be to still teach, And then to also help support some of those new teachers, whether it's from observing them and helping them figure out really engaging lessons, or really how to set up the grade book, like why some people do total points versus percentages. Like those are all things that we know from like lots of experience and college classes where you discuss a lot of that they really don't know. So my dream job would be to kind of marry the two.
I love that. That's my dream job too. I feel like since I've been out of the classroom, staying home with my kids and doing this full time, I like have moved into that role like virtually, where I'm getting to kind of do that with some newer teachers, and I love it. But I would love when my kids are in grade school again to go back and be able to do both like that. I think that's so fun. Be with students, but then also help teachers. That'd be awesome. Okay. So I know you didn't mention this, but I do know that you taught AP biology. So tell me about your experience teaching AP, because we've both done that, and what advice you'd maybe give someone who's maybe teaching it for the first time, because it's very
okay. It is. It's a beast of a course, you know that. And my first time teaching it, I was at this small private school and I had 5 different preps. So it's not like that was all I could focus on. I had other courses and other students too.
That was my exact same situation. So help the people, help me, pass me.
Okay, so I have several things that I would tell a brand new first year teacher teaching AP Bio, whether you're a first year teacher in general or just your first time teaching AP Bio. This advice is really good for either. But number one, give yourself some grace. It doesn't matter if you have taught for 20 years. This course is just challenging. And when I started, I mean, I was reading the textbook, the weekend before, and there are so many things that I'm sure I learned in college, but I did not remember learning them, or I had to refresh my memory, stuff that I didn't teach in honors bio. And, even today, this is my 4th year teaching the class. I am just so honest with my students. I do not know all the answers, and I tell them that. And I think you have mentioned before, I don't know if it was in an Instagram, but it made me laugh. It stuck out in my mind because you said, your students always humble you because they think you have a PhD and like all these different categories.
I'm like, I appreciate that y'all think I'm so smart, but like, I do not know. I mean, I love that you said that about studying, because I will never forget the night before teaching about like the lac operon, watching the Paul Anderson Bozeman science video like 5 times in a row. I was like, I will understand this. I will be able to explain this to them. Like I was just studying all the time.
And to those teachers, know that you are not alone, that we have been there too. And, I remind myself that so much of AP Bio is teaching them how to think and how to think critically through situations, and not just, memorizing that information. So a lot of times when they ask me a question I don't know, I just try to model thinking, and I'll say, hey, I really don't know the answer, but let's think through this. What do we know? And sometimes we'll look it up and we were pretty close, and sometimes we were way off base, but ultimately they got to see like my thinking process. So just know you do not have to know everything and know all the answers. You will be fine. And you do know more than they know. And I had to repeat that to myself so many times. I know more than they know. The second thing I would say is join the amazing Facebook group. Hopefully, if you are listening, you already know that exists. But if you do not, it is a little gem on the internet. And it is just full of, first of all, a shared drive with tons of resources. So you're not reinventing the wheel, just a community of support that you can ask questions or just use the search tool. I would not have survived that first year without that group.
Yeah, there's so many people in it too that like are graders for the AP exam. And I feel like that was so helpful because you could ask like, okay, on this topic, like how in detail are we really expected to go? Or is it more big picture? Or just little questions like, hey, if they don't label A, B, C, D, E on their answer sheet, do they still get credit? Like there's just that's truly the best Facebook group for teachers I've ever been in, is that AP Bio one.
It's amazing. And I still refer to it all the time. And lastly, and I would again encourage you to do this for any class, but especially with AP Bio, is reflect on what you've taught at the end of the unit. I am so bad for not, in the beginning, I wouldn't write stuff down. And then when you're teaching it a full year later, you don't remember what went well, what went poorly. So now what I do for every single one of my classes, I have a big Google Doc, and that's kind of how I organize my lesson plans. But at the bottom, after every unit, I have a big box for notes. And I make sure that I just make a note if a lab went really well, or it was maybe a waste of time. It was a lot of prep and the students didn't get a lot out of it. Or maybe a case study was really cool, but parts D and E just weren't necessary, scrap them for next year, or maybe just what my students really struggled with. And I need to figure out a better way to teach it. And that way, when I'm looking back a year later, I kind of know already, okay, we need to figure out a new plan for this. And that is so helpful for me because I can't remember it, especially with 5 preps.
Oh yeah. I love that you do it right away too, because I would, even if I couldn't, because I do it all digitally like that too, but I would even just write on a Post-it note, like during like the water property stations I'm doing, I would write down like the instructions on number 3 don't make sense. Like we got to redo that for next year and just like stick it on. And I still have like a 4-inch black binder with all my AP bio stuff. And my husband will sometimes laugh and he's like, you're just holding on all this stuff. Like you don't know when you'll be back in the classroom or if you'll get to teach it again. I was like, but if I do, I'm going to have it all there because you're right. Like you learn so much from your own experiences. And I loved what you said about being like humble and just being okay with not being perfect at it. And that the best thing our students can see from us is that modeling your thinking. Like it's not about you having the most perfectly written labs with the perfect procedures, because I was using a lot of the labs just straight from the lab notebook from, College Board. Mm-hmm. And they have some like not clear instructions at all. And so it was good for us to like model processing it together. I love that you said that was something you did.
One more thing about advice for a new teacher is please feel like you do not have to do all of the things. I remember my first 2 years, everyone was doing March Mammal Madness and the group was all about that. And my classes were every other day and I just couldn't keep up with it. Like I was trying to do like 2 of the breakdowns a day. And I remember feeling really frustrated and feeling like I was giving up a lot of class time. And the last 2 years, I just realized, you know what? I don't think that's a really great activity for me because of the every other day. And once I let myself not feel bad about it, I realized that it's okay. My students are going to learn in other ways, but I felt really guilty because all these teachers were doing a great job. So don't do all of the things. Pick what you're going to do well and do those and don't feel bad about it. You can't do everything.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I was so grateful that my AP Summer Institute teacher said, when I was looking at that whole lab notebook and I knew I had like no resources, I was like, I will not be able to do all of these. Like the idea of the bacterial transformation lab made me like my hands sweat. I was like, I just don't have anything to get started with this. And she was like, listen, try to do one of these per big idea. And then every year add in another and you can do modification, like other things. And that was so encouraging to be like, okay, the standard is not, 13 or whatever the number was. Like start with one per big idea. Like that feels manageable and we can get better over time.
Yep. I love the idea of adding in one thing a year.
Okay. So tell me too, because one of the hardest things about teaching AP Bio is just the pace. Like and you have them every other day. Like I had them every day, but it was only for 50 minutes. And then, when you have Spirit Week, you lose an entire week. And it's like, does anyone care about the AP classes? So what do you do? Like, how do you keep up?
That is so true. First of all, I did feel frustrated in the beginning that like I didn't have the same schedule as others. Our neighboring high school has them every day for an hour and a half for the entire year. And I remember feeling really frustrated until I realized that the schedule's out of my control. This is what I'm working with. There are plenty of other teachers that have the same amount of time as I do. When you divvy up my schedule, it works out to be what you were working on, a traditional schedule. So this is what I have to work with. And really what I do at the beginning of the year, I sit down and I look at kind of holidays and Spirit Weeks and stuff like that. And I just plan out how much time I intend to spend on each unit. I do not have all of the activities and labs. Like I'm not talking full year. I just know, okay, I'm going to spend a month on unit 2 or whatever it is, and then stick to it. Once you start that unit, you know that you have X amount of time. And I kind of start mentally planning, okay, notes and labs and this and that, and really just stick to it. And it's hard, especially when I see other teachers doing maybe 3 or 4 labs in a unit. And I feel like I only have the time to do 1 or 2, but I just have to remind myself that that's okay. This is what I have to work with. And my students are still learning and growing. But make that plan and don't budge or else you'll find yourself in a pickle at the end of the year.
Right. I like what you said about chunking it up. That's the one like blessing and curse of that Facebook group is the blessing is all of like the wealth of knowledge and resources, but the curse is you see people that are like, okay, I'm in unit 5. And you're like, I'm in unit 3. So why are you asking unit 5 questions? Like, I'm not there yet.
That is me.
Yeah. You just got to work with your schedule for sure. Okay. So another question for you is just about grading specifically for AP Bio, because it is technically like a college course. So do you treat how you grade things in that class differently than you treat like how you do it in anatomy, or also like additionally to grading and just classroom management? Like, how do you differentiate AP Bio in that perspective, since it is technically a college level course?
Well, I do give a lot more homework in AP Bio, and I don't give a lot of homework in my other classes. But with the meeting every other day, it's just necessary. They have to do some outside learning and studying. So I do feel like I give a lot more homework and outside work in that class. And I also don't grade a ton of like minor assessments. My students know that we are doing this for the purpose of learning and understanding, and it will benefit you on the test. And if I goof off, then that's only going to hurt me. So I think since they are taking this college level class and they are, like science for the most part and intrinsically motivated, they understand that. But there are definitely times I have to pull kids off to the side and say, look, I know this isn't for a grade, but hear me out and beg them to do their work a little bit. I don't find that I have to have really strict procedures compared to my freshman classes. And I kind of let them guide the management a little bit more in that class. There are definitely times I have to have conversations about like, all right, y'all, I've been noticing a lot more kids on their phones lately. Let's talk about some consequences why that's not, a good choice. But for the most part, I let them kind of guide the class, and they do a good job. I find that when you treat them a little bit older, they're able to make better choices. And of course, I would never do that in a freshman bio class. It would be a disaster.
Exactly.
And then one other thing that I do that I would never do in another class, it might be a little taboo. Hopefully, if other AP bio teachers are listening, they don't get mad at me. But I do not curve anything, but I do test corrections. And I don't necessarily do them every single time. I kind of look at the grades and the breakdown, but my logic or my philosophy behind that is it's just one more time that they're revisiting the content. It's one more time that they're thinking through, okay, what was my thought process on this question and why did I get it wrong? Or what could I do differently next time? And it's just one more time that they're looking over that content, which is going to benefit them.
Agreed. I did. I never curved either, but I definitely wanted them to do those test corrections because like you said, it's so important that so much of AP Bio is just getting them to think about things the right way. And so getting them to look at it again and think about it again. Something I did really different in AP was I was really strict about the time that they took the test, where I feel like I'm much more flexible about that in other like if it looked like not the whole class wasn't going to finish in Bio 1, like I might, stretch it or whatever. But in AP, I really trained them in those time constrictions because then they saw when they got on the exam, they were like, I actually finished on time and so many people around me weren't finishing. I was like, I know that's why I hated to put the pressure, but I love what you said about like kind of being able to let them manage themselves. I feel like that's something I would never do with underclassmen, but that's one of the beauties of AP is like, you can kind of set the tone for the year. Like you said, like, I want to give you all a ton of freedom, but if I have to like rein it in, I will type thing.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay. So we can't talk about teaching AP Bio without talking about the exam. So any like tried and true methods you use for reviewing or prepping, or did you just kind of teach until the exam came, or did you stop and review for a little bit? Kind of what was your strategy?
So because of the time I have, I build in no time for review, like no time for in class, just pure review. And that always makes me jealous when teachers talk about their, 2 or 3 weeks, but I'm always pushing to finish the curriculum. But I do several things. One of them is, and we just did this last week as a class, we decided on a Saturday where they're going to come and take a full length practice exam. And I've done this every year that I taught AP Bio. I recognize that I'm really blessed to be at a school where I'm able to do that. And I know that all teachers might not have that ability. So if you can't, don't stress about it. But I always make like a bunch of breakfast casseroles and they can come in and like, athletic gear and leggings, no like dress code, anything like that. And we sit down and we take a full length practice exam. And what I have found is that it always boosts their confidence. Like they're so nervous to take the exam, but they walk out of there like, okay, I actually knew more of that than I thought I would. And they do better than they think. And I love that it doesn't knock them down. It makes them more confident going into the exam in my experience. And they always just really talk about how great that was for them and their experience. And then come exam day, they really know what to expect. That 3-hour period, they've done it before.
Right.
Another thing that I do is that once we start the second half of the year, so once I get to unit 5, I start adding in what I call throwback questions from previous units. And I used to just say there were going to be throwback questions on there. But what I found is that no one studied because it wasn't specific enough. So instead, for unit 5, I do throwback questions from unit 1. So they know to go back and look at unit 1 on their own. And once we get to unit 6, I do throwback questions from unit 2. So it guides their studying a little bit more. And since I don't have that built-in review at the end, I just am kind of forcing them to revisit those units, however much or little they want. They know that there's going to be at least like 5 or 6 multiple choice questions. And I might even throw in one like short FRQ on the test, just kind of hold them accountable for going back. And then really the only other thing I do, and they probably do not use this or appreciate it at all, but I model what I would do. Like I create a calendar. And I'm like, okay, well, if I was a student in this class, based on my calendar, I would be studying unit 1 this week. And I just kind of show them that they can break it down and prepare, write it out, what units they're going to study when. And I will literally pass out a calendar and say, if I was a student, this is what I would be doing. Take it or leave it. But that way they at least have some sort of guide that they can follow.
I really like that. I was the exact same with not having the time. Like there was no time for built-in review. And so I pulled like some sort of review packet out of that Facebook group that someone had made. And I just kind of gave it to them and was like, you can do this in your own time. Like here are like study sessions where I'll be available outside of school. Like I would love to help you at any point, but like we aren't going to be having all of this review in class. And I like what you did too about just like incorporating the throwback questions. And I love that you just told them like, we're not trying to trick them. We want just to get them to review the material again. So I love how you just said, hey, these are straight up going to be from unit 1. So make sure you look at unit 1 type thing.
Yep. No surprises.
I love that. Okay. So I know you taught a lot of anatomy, you taught AP Bio. So that's a lot of upperclassmen courses. And the month that I'm going to air this episode of the podcast is going to be all about like senioritis, which I feel like affects all students, not just seniors, but especially the seniors and upperclassmen. So any tips along those lines in terms of like keeping those upperclassmen students engaged through the end of the school year, especially like thinking of your AP Bio students who are getting those college acceptance letters, or, I mean, you live where I live, so it's like warm come March. So like come March, they're like at the beach or, out on the water.
Skipping Fridays.
Yes, exactly. Like, I'm like, wow, I'm so happy that they came in on a Saturday for you. That's amazing. So tell me, what tips do you have? Like, how do you do it other than breakfast casserole on a Saturday?
Short answer is I do nothing. I feel like I push through and power through and I don't change anything. I feel like my students know my expectations and they know what to expect each unit. They know they're going to have several quizzes. They're going to have this unit test, and it never fails that at some point they're going to come in and there's going to be like one spokesperson for the class, right? You know what I'm talking about. There's going to be one spokesperson and they're like, Miss Price, none of us are ready. Like I stayed up until 4 a.m. studying and we're all just clueless and none of us know what's going on. And I just calmly tell them, if you don't feel prepared, that is because you did not prepare, not because I didn't prepare you. And we are taking this test today, or we are taking this quiz today, or whatever it is. And really after once or twice of them begging for me to push something back, they just realize I'm not going to. And we just power through. I will also say that I try to be observant of my students that are slipping, that I know are capable of much more. And a lot of times, instead of this full class broadcast announcement, it is so helpful to pull them aside and just say, look, I know what you're capable of, and you are just not living up to that right now. And I just really don't want you to have any regrets, especially, as grades are finalized and GPAs are counted. I know what you're capable of. And a lot of times when you pull them aside, they're like, oh, I know, I'm so sorry. And they like hate disappointing you. And you can see a shift in them once they are called out on it a little bit. I just know they hate disappointing teachers.
It's so true. And that one-on-one relationship and connection makes such a big difference. I also love how you just keep pressing on. Like, I do think if they know that they can like push you to relax your standards a little or take it easy on them, then they'll just keep pushing. I mean, that's exactly how my toddlers are. Like, if I hold the line, they know like she's not going to play. I was like, my kids were literally just playing pretend before we got on this call. And they were like, one was the mommy and one was the daddy, and they were playing with baby dolls. And I was like listening to them talk to their baby dolls and how strict they were. I was like, dang, mama must be strict because they are hearing me. But it is true. If you kind of school wise, if you hold that line, they'll keep to it. And I feel like time goes by faster if it is full. Like if you just kind of like are lax and like, whatever, we'll just see what happens. It makes the days like drag on. So,
oh, I totally agree.
I feel that. Okay. So another thing I really want to get your perspective on, because it's a perspective I just cannot offer my audience at all. So you've been in the classroom for the last 10 years and you haven't even missed a beat because your most recent pregnancy and maternity leave fell over the summer. So you didn't even technically take a maternity leave. So you truly have been in it for 10 years. You've been in it during the pandemic and all of that. So any advice or strategies or hacks that you've had these last few years specific to just pandemic teaching and how you've kept your morale up, how you've kept your students' morale up, like what has that looked like for you?
Well, even though you didn't give, personal advice on being in the classroom, but a lot of your advice has been really helpful. And what I mean by that is, figure out what is frustrating you and try your hardest to find a solution. Finding solutions is just so important because you can get frustrated with a situation and it will cause you to burn yourself out, burn your students out. And that's no place to be. We've all been the exhausted, tired teacher where we don't have enough to give at school. We don't have enough to give at home. And that's exhausting. So know what you can control. First of all, there are so many things that are outside of my control. I am going to have students that when I show up are all of a sudden virtual. Sometimes it is 10 students that are all of a sudden virtual because of close contacts. And that is just not something that's in my control. I can't be upset about it. It's not in their control either. So those things that are not in your control, put aside. Don't let them steal your, attitude for the day or anything like that. And then figure out solutions to those situations that are within your control. I try to upload a lot of things to Google Classroom, even if I don't have a virtual student, in anticipation. And I find that when I do show up and I have a lot of virtual kids and I can just hit, post on Google Classroom, I don't feel as frustrated. And there have been times when I maybe put stuff on Google Classroom and I didn't need it, and I was frustrated that I spent the time doing that. But like I said, there have been so many more times where that has benefited me. So figure out what really stresses you out or makes you frustrated and just figure out some sort of way that you can make that easier on yourself or find a solution for it, I guess would be my best advice.
Yeah, I think that's really wise, just to try to identify and then like problem solve and then everything else hold really loosely. Like I know even for me, I'm not in the classroom right now, but I mean, daycare schedule, like my kids only go part-time so that I can do this from home, but it's like, I'll have a full list of things I want to do this week, but then we get the call Monday morning that it's like, sorry, out for someone in your class has it. So, the yellow room is closed for the next 14 days. You're like, what am I supposed to do?
Not the yellow room.
No, I know. And then when it's not your kid's color room, you're just like, praise. I'm so grateful. But yeah, it's about really holding it loosely because I am not of someone who holds things loosely naturally. So that's super hard for me. I remember when Hurricane Matthew hit us down here in 2016, our school like majorly flooded. And so we had it'd be like, okay, we're going to go back this date. And then it kept getting pushed back and pushed back. And then when we finally did go back, we were all floating because we had half of our buildings were still damaged. And
oh gosh,
for me, I'm the type that I was like, okay, I need to readjust the lesson plans for the entire year. And I was like wanting to like totally repace the whole thing. Instead, it was like, I just need to take this like 1 week at a time. Again, not my natural personality, but holding it looser. And again, like you said, lots of grace for yourself and your students, I think.
Yeah. And the lots of grace that I talked about earlier with AP Bio absolutely falls into this category too. Just keep your morale up, give yourself lots of grace. Don't sweat the small stuff. And just know, even with moving through curriculum, since this is such a strange year with constantly having kids virtual and not virtual, you might not get through as much content as you would in a normal year. And I just have to remind myself, my students are still learning and growing. It does not matter to them that we did not get through, 2 to 3 weeks of content at the end of the year. I have still done the best that I could with what I was given. And that's what you have to remind yourself.
Yes. And I think the more you can remember that this is a job and it's not our life, the more you can hold it loosely like that and just say, hey, I wasn't hired to be perfect at this. Like I was hired just to do my best with what I have. And so that's what I'm going to do,
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is something I wanted to ask you. I was extremely humbled when I found out this past year, I think it was you, an experienced anatomy teacher and someone I know in your life, a friend, science teacher friend, purchased my anatomy curriculum, which was weird because I feel like publishing my resources was already like so exposing when I started doing it 5 years ago or 6 years ago, whatever it was now. But then to know like someone I actually know in real life is using it, I was like nervous, but also excited. So I would love to hear what your thoughts have been. First off, why? Because you're an experienced anatomy teacher. Why did you decide to purchase some resources? And two, how is it, It's Not Rocket Science anatomy curriculum helped you and your students?
Perfect. I would love to talk about your curriculum. And honestly, it has been the biggest blessing this year, and I'm so grateful to have it. But to answer the why is 10 years ago, I feel like technology has really changed a lot in 10 years. I feel like when I talk about this, it sounds like I started teaching in the 1970s, which I did not. But 10 years ago, I was literally cutting with scissors and taping down stuff. Even Google Docs was just not really a thing.
No.
I still have binders and paper copies. So when all of this virtual stuff started and teaching 5 preps, taking all of my anatomy curriculum that I had created and just putting it online in a digital friendly format where students could click and answer stuff without needing a printer was just a task that I was not really willing to bite off this year. And you mentioned earlier that I had a baby in June over the summer, and I just knew that it was going to be a huge task for me to really revamp that. And I wanted to be intentional with my family time and trying to do the least amount of work that I could, at home. So I bought your science curriculum because it was ready to go. It was everything that I needed. And it truly has saved me so much time at home. And for that, I'm really grateful. 5 preps is a lot to manage. Even if I was just teaching anatomy, it would have taken a lot of time to make everything digital. But when you realize that you have 5 classes to prep for and you still only have an hour and a half planning, I mean, when you divvy that up, it's like 15 minutes, per class. And it's not feasible, really.
It's so true. I did all of February's episodes are about balancing multiple preps because it's so hard. And one of the episodes is all about like, you basically have to just decide what class you're going to focus on. And then the rest, you either need to like bring in help or just like let go and be like, I'll focus on that one next year. Because you can't do A+ effort and all the things for all the classes when you have more than 3, I would say. Like, I feel like 3 at least was my limit of like what I felt like I could manage in my life.
Mm-hmm. Also, I had taught it for 10 years. I've taught anatomy for 10 years, and I felt like there was a lot of things I needed to change, but I didn't know how to go about it. Like I was really stuck in my ways. And what I found was my units were getting bigger and bigger because I kept like adding, like, I really want to teach this year. So I would add stuff. And then what happened was I really wasn't getting through my curriculum because I had added so much stuff. And when I would sit down and try to like cut something out, it was really hard for me because I felt like everything was important. So I kind of felt like I was stuck in my ways and I just needed like a little bit of a clean slate, a fresh start. And I'm super embarrassed to say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. I have never taught the endocrine system, and I am teaching it right now with your curriculum because,
Woo!
like I said, my units got so big that, there was stuff I wasn't able to cover. So I'm like thrilled that I'm learning new stuff too. And I know that that's going to make me a better teacher. And, your curriculum is a little bit different than the way I taught it. I did a whole unit on tissues. It's like my favorite unit, or one of my favorite units, I should say. But it's been so great looking at your stuff and comparing it to my stuff. And eventually when my child is older, I'll kind of make some stuff my own. The perfect thing is your curriculum's editable. So, I'll figure out what I really want to stress and use your packets. And it has been such a blessing to be able to show up and not worry about making copies and lesson plans. And I'm so thrilled. Buying curriculum does not mean you're not a great teacher. Your forte is writing curriculum, and that's definitely not a forte of mine. So I'll focus on my fortes and let you write the curriculum.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, but I really appreciate you saying that too, in the sense that like being a teacher is different from being a curriculum writer. Like they're not the same thing. Like I feel like I have shifted my entire career right now that I am writing curriculum, and I hope to get back more to teaching in the classroom one day, but it's different. And for people outside of the education field to expect teachers to do all of these things they just don't get how much actually goes into it. And I also really love what you said about how, especially a class like anatomy, there's so many different ways it can be taught. And there's so many, like that class you could easily have 2 full years and still not go through it all.
Absolutely.
And so I don't think you should feel embarrassed at all about not teaching endocrine, because you have to make decisions. Like, I'm sure you've seen in mine, I just made decisions that I'm not going into detail on all these different things that you could get into so much detail on. Like I try to be really clear when I describe it. Like this is really my vision when I wrote mine was like, I want to just get people excited about the body systems, and I want to make sure to cover them all. But in order to do that, I'm like majorly cutting stuff out detail wise. And I'm just like, they'll get the details if they take anatomy again in college. That's kind of my perspective, but
you're exactly right.
You're right. Like it's like, I couldn't go in the details because then I'd lose out on reproductive or some other system, and I couldn't get rid of any of them. So it's hard to make those decisions. But okay. So last but not least, this is a question I want to ask all my podcast guests I ever have. And I would love for you to share one way you have simplified your life recently. And this could be a life hack. It could be organizational tool, a new habit, a resource. It could be anything. And it doesn't even have to do with the classroom. It could just have to do with your life. So what's one way you've simplified your life recently, Diana?
Okay. Well, I told this to a friend recently, and she was like, I do the same thing. So clearly it's no joke or no secret, but especially in a world of online shopping, is when I get a good box from Amazon, or diaper boxes are great because they have really strong handles. I leave it in the laundry room, and that becomes my donation box. And I find that I fill it up so quickly. And I used to always be intimidated. Like I felt like if I was going to clean out my closet, I like had to make it this massive project and like purge the whole thing. But if I like already have a donation box handy, I might just see a couple shirts in there that I know I haven't worn in like 2 years and throw them in there. Or when I'm walking through the house, declutter. And you would be shocked at how fast you fill it up. And once it's full, I take it to be donated. Sometimes it'll fill up in a week. Other times it might be a month. But when you find one of those perfect boxes, reuse it, repurpose it. So I feel better about that. At least I'm giving it a second job. And it just helps me stay on top of the clutter a little bit in my home.
I love that. And I love having a specific place, because I agree. Like I'll go through my closet trying to pick out something to wear, and I'll see like 4 things. I'm like, I never wear that. But then if I don't have anywhere to put it, it just kind of still hangs there.
Exactly.
So that's so smart just to have a location. I'm going to start doing that, especially with all the diaper boxes we're about to have. That's awesome.
Yes.
We're about to hit those diaper boxes again. Well, seriously, I can't tell you how much of a treat this has been. I've been so excited to talk to you. It has just really brought me a lot of joy. So thank you for taking some precious nap time to talk to me. I'm so grateful.
Thank you. It has been so fun. And I'm so excited for you having your 3rd baby. And I'll be thinking about you and following along to hear what it is.
Hopefully when this airs, that baby will be here, or else it'll be 2 weeks overdue and I'll be ready for it to come out. So we'll see what happens.
So exciting. This has been fun.
It has been so fun. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you learned as much from it as I did and are able to take away some practical strategies for simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher. And make sure to share this episode with a teacher friend who could learn from Diana's experiences in the classroom as well. Just a quick reminder, if you've been enjoying the podcast these last few months, I would love it if you could leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts so that other teachers can find the Secondary Science Simplified podcast more easily. And as always, I'm so grateful for your support here at It's Not Rocket Science and the Secondary Science Simplified podcast. See you next time. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.